So, ladies and gentlemen, a real treat for you again tonight. This is Robin Horsfall. We've had him on before. He's one of our class, one of the digital heroes of Ukraine. And I've been enjoying his new book called Slava Ukraini, which is like basically a bunch of his LinkedIn posts, and it sort of reads through like chronological order, brings back a lot of memories. How you keeping, Robin?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. Had a difficult week getting over what may have been a burst of COVID, but it was pretty serious, whatever it was, and I'm just coming out of it. So excuse me if I have to clear my throat every now and then. But yeah, things are going okay. Looking forward to Christmas, um, for my own part. But there's always something happening, especially as far as Ukraine's concerned.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll be over there in a couple of weeks, and so I always feel a bit guilty leaving that country because I never know when I'm going to see if I'm going to see my friends again. And
Mm.
it just seems like the West has given Ukraine enough weapons to keep them fighting and not to like pull back into defensive positions. And because it just seems like they're given enough weapons so that the maximum amount of Ukrainians are dying on the front line because otherwise they maybe would be been doing less risky things like trying to break through these miles and miles of mines, you know?
Well, I don't think there's any conspiracy to that, really. I think the West has given as much as they have. And what this has done is it's actually revealed to the world how poorly prepared most of the NATO nations were for any extended form of warfare. The stocks that Europe and the USA to a lesser degree had have already disappeared. They're manufacturing new stocks now, but they're struggling to keep up. So it's a reflection of how lazy and flabby and full of hubris NATO had become over the last generation and wasn't really prepared for any kind of long-term campaign in Europe. So we're giving them everything we've got, or as much as we possibly can, without compromising our own basic security facilities. So it's a tough place to be. However, while Ukraine is winning the military war, at the moment it's losing a certain amount of the propaganda war, the war of words, and the war of words in any kind of long-term conflict is a vital part of the equation. And unfortunately for us, our press are quite happy to spout Russian propaganda on a daily basis in order to work on people's base emotions, which are fear and anger and greed, and do Vladimir Putin's job for him to undermine the confidence of the West in supporting this war against his tyranny.
What would you say the main items of propaganda the West are peddling?
Well, every time Putin comes out and makes one of his acolytes come out and make a statement about the possibility of nuclear war, they immediately throw it out there on the front pages, and he says this, he says that, with the excuse that, oh well, yeah, nobody believes him. He's just threatening, but it frightens people. It makes people worry. It makes people give up their easygoing support for right and wrong, for what is happening to Ukraine, and it's there all the time. And I've spoken to several journalists over the past few years about how they behave in regard to propaganda, and they will reply and say, well, it's our job to report the news. And I say, no, it's your job to report the news responsibly. And I think that in many cases they're irresponsible because they're only interested in clickbait. They're only interested in driving forward the financial figures of the corporation they work for by scaring people, by frightening people, and they don't have any consideration at all about how their behavior affects the war program and affects Ukraine's chance to obtain victory.
Sounds like politicians, short-term profit versus long-term security of the nation and the surrounding nations.
Yeah, well, it is one of the is one of the weaknesses of democracy that we have to negotiate and we have to cooperate and we have to build up momentum and we have to agree on everything. And that's okay. One of our weaknesses, also our greatest strength as well. But when you're up against an autocracy or a dictatorship, then you've got a situation where you're up against an enemy that can make a decision quickly and mobilize a large number of people and control the narrative to his own people. We can't control the narrative to our own people because the press are busy selling Russian propaganda on free of charge. It's not great.
Quite a few times on LinkedIn, we see propaganda that's shared by people, and I'll often ask them a question that's never answered. It's like, okay, this is you have this view about President Zelensky or corruption or this kind of stuff, but how much time have you spent actually in Ukraine on the ground or even interviewing Ukrainian people? It's not, it's
Yeah.
just scratching an itch and throwing it out there because they, for whatever reason, they don't want to agree with anything their administration is doing supporting Ukraine.
Yeah, I had a big, a quite heated disagreement with a journalist who wanted me to comment on an investigative story he was doing regarding the corruption of material that was being sent to Ukraine, and that it was ending up in Africa and it was ending up in strange places. And the inference was that this was institutionalized corruption, and that Ukraine was deliberately misdirecting product in order for people to get rich. And I said, well, look, it's a war. And in a war, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of equipment is moved on a daily basis, and there is going to be theft. It's always going to be the case that there's going to be theft when you're moving that amount of material. It doesn't imply and it doesn't mean that there's any kind of institutionalized corruption behind it. It just means that there are thieves involved, and there will always be thieves when there's money around. And that kind of story, which again supports the Russian propaganda system, it feeds into them. And I ask questions. I say, what the hell are you guys doing reporting stories like this when you have absolutely no clear concrete evidence? What you're doing is suggesting something, and then you're undermining the West's ability to support Ukraine in its war.
Yeah, I would respect them more if they actually went then themselves, organized aid or whatever, and saw the whole process through their circle of connections. So even if there was a lot of missing weapons and stuff like that, how much money have you actually given to Ukraine? Have you actually done anything to lift your finger? Because you can, if you don't trust that the aid will get there, at least you can help a few people. You could get some contacts in Ukraine and deliver aid yourself, drive the aid there and make sure it gets to you can physically give it to the people like refugees.
Yeah. Follow it. Don't sit in Morocco and write a story about it. Follow it. Go down the line. See the difficulties. See how hard it is. Watch the food get to the front line. Watch the ammunition get to the front lines. Watch the bodies coming back. That's where they really need to be. And when they do, they should be filming what's going on, not filming themselves, because there's so many journalists now, embedded or otherwise, who turn up in a situation, and the camera's on them all the time. The camera's not on the victims of the war. The camera's not on the soldiers. The camera's not on the action. The camera's on the journalist. So the journalist is there to make a name for themselves sometimes. That doesn't apply to all of them, and credit to some of them for being there. But there are those that just want to make a name for themselves.
Yeah, and the people that don't, for whatever reason, don't like Ukraine, it's almost like they want Ukraine to be defeated. And so if Ukraine's defeated, what is the future outcome for the West? You're going to have every authoritarian regime now that thinks they can get away with taking land. You're going to have China and Taiwan. You're going to have Venezuela and Guyana. You're going to have no one's going to trust that NATO's going to back up anybody. And you're basically living in the 1984. We have all these world powers just constantly at war. I mean, is that a world that people want to live in, that are pro-Russian propaganda?
People don't think that deeply most of the time. They're mostly involved in paying the bills, getting to work, looking at the electricity bill, seeing how much it's costing, blaming somebody for it. The war in Ukraine is a good way of saying this is the reason my power bill's so high this winter. And that's as far as it goes. And the rest of the time, they're picking up sound bites of information from national media, from television, from YouTube. And those little pieces of information are what influence them most not long tirades about with statistics about what's going on in the war. They're not going to listen to that. Most of the people are trying to busily get on with their everyday lives, and they don't care as much as they'd like to pretend they do. So somebody's got to be out there all the time, banging the drum for Ukraine. Boris Johnson did a terrific job when he was Prime Minister of leading that particular issue. David Cameron's there now, but I don't see a great deal of rhetoric from Rishi Sunak or his foreign secretary at the moment. I don't see an awful lot of drum banging in Europe either. People are doing the best they can, I'm sure they are, but there's nobody fighting this propaganda war, this war of words. There's nobody getting up and beating the drum every single day and saying, we've got to win, we've got to defeat this tyranny, because if we don't, it will be Poland, it will be Latvia, it will be Lithuania, it will be pressure on the borders of Germany, it will be Moldavia and all the other countries on that eastern fringe again. And you know, we watch with sort of in kind of disbelief sometimes at the nonsense that is getting sent out there day after day after day and being repeated by Western journalists, which only helps the Russian campaign. It happens in America too.
Yeah, some of the things that are quite extreme in terms of propaganda. I mean, I met a few people and they'll come up to me and say that Boris Johnson flew in and told Zelensky not to negotiate for peace or something like that. Something like they were talking with Putin, but the Russians were outside of Kiev massacring people in Bucha and all these kind of places. So what peace could be negotiated with people like that? You know, if Russia takes back Kiev, we're going to have another 20, 30 million refugees in Europe. It'll completely dwarf the amount of refugees that are there already. It'll have a total economic collapse unless you want to, you know, allow genocide of several million people, because you just cannot trust those Russian murderers.
Ben Hodges has turned around several times over the past 2 years and said Europe failed, NATO failed, it was failed deterrence. We failed when they went into Georgia. We failed when they went into Crimea. We failed when Obama drew his red line in Syria. And we gave confidence to the bully to step forward and push. And the thing about authoritarian states is when they perceive you as weak, they'll push. When they perceive you as strong, they'll stay where they are. Now, they've perceived the West as weak. They also, unfortunately for them, perceived Ukraine as weak. And Ukraine wasn't weak. Ukraine was ready. It mobilized its population against the Russian invasion. It was ready for war with them. It had trained its soldiers. It upgraded its army, and it was ready to hold them. And it's only that has held back the Russian hordes. Now, Boris Johnson came along afterwards, and he used Zelensky's character to motivate the rest of Europe, to get people working behind it. Had Kyiv failed in 3 days, everyone would sit back and on, well, that's really sad, isn't it? But there's nothing we can do. But the fact that the Ukrainians fought and fought and fought, they turned Russia back on the road south from Belarus. They prevented the Russians from holding the airport outside Kyiv, and they defeated the Russian attempt at a coup. And that's where it stopped. And that was the opening for the West to start to support the courage of the Ukrainian people. But they would have equally happily turned around and said, well, never mind. What can we do? We're in it now. We're in it. And if we don't win it, we're going to be into another one. And then we're going to be into another one and another one. And Russia will keep pushing. That's what bullies do. It's like playground politics in many ways. I'll hit you if you're weak. I'll nick your sweets. And if you hit me back, then I'll go and pick on somebody else.
Yeah, you should never start a fight you're not prepared to finish. Because there's so many Ukrainian men on the front line that are depending on us. We're the ones that have motivated them a lot of the times with their weapons and support. And they look to the UK a lot for leadership, I believe, or motivation. And we can't just abandon them because we find Starbucks more expensive, or we're finding it hard to heat our homes. And I do think we should actually have more solidarity at home. And I blame a lot of the upper class for that. They're not reducing the rents. They're continuing like we're just extracting the wealth from their workers as normal. I feel like the rich and the upper class should do more to ease the burdens of us that are not as fortunate. And I say that not for just for the UK, but it's for Austria and a lot of European countries. You know, a lot of people just thinks things are normal, but this is like a war economy. You know, the UK, they confiscated a lot of factories and things like that for war production, and the rich need to do their fair share.
Well, there are huge problems in the United Kingdom now. I mean, I lived in Prague for 5 years, and I had to come back for a family emergency. Now I live in the UK again. But my first feeling, my big feeling over having been home now for nearly 2 years, is that nothing works in the UK. The leadership doesn't work, the local authorities don't work, the National Health Service doesn't work, the transport system doesn't work. There's very little opportunity for young people, and there is an awful lot of untapped resources in young people that isn't being used because they've nowhere to go, nothing to do with it. We've got a military that's got so small now it would struggle to defend Dover, let alone the United Kingdom. And without the support of all the other countries in Europe, it's very much a nothing. The Ukrainians have wiped out the equivalent of 5 British armies in the last 2 years. And that's still casualty figures, conservative casualty figures, 332,000 now, Russian killed or seriously wounded. That's the equivalent of 5 or 6 British armies. That's how weak it is. And even now, having seen what's happened in Ukraine, the British government is still reducing the manpower in the British army. And they say, oh, well, we're putting money into technology. But we've seen the technology working in Ukraine. It still needs the man in the trench. It still needs the man with the shoulder-fired weapons. It still needs the man carrying the gun. It still needs the man driving the tank. And yet they've still failed to deal with this obvious and outrageous problem that they've got with reducing the British armed forces to lower and lower levels of manpower. And it's disgusting.
Yeah, I read in your book, Slava Ukraini, that you would struggle to fill like one of the larger stadiums with the British Army. I think it was like 70,000 troops we had or something like that.
Well, if Twickenham Stadium in West London, the rugby stadium, holds 82,000 people. Now, the British Army, without reserves, consists of 68,000 men and women now, 68,000. That fills 3 sides of Twickenham Stadium, the whole British Army. Now, that's all force, all arms. Now, if you take that and take the teeth arms out of it, which are armor, infantry, and artillery, you're probably going to get them down one side of Twickenham Stadium, all the members of those teeth arms, the fighting troops. That's how small and weak and bloody useless it is to have an army that small. It was 175,000 when I joined in 1972, and now it's 68,000. And you wonder why the Russians are pushing? Well, they're pushing because we're perceived as weak. We don't scare them. And it's no good turning around and saying, oh, yes, well, we've got nuclear submarines. You know, they only work as a deterrent. They don't work as a weapon.
So what do you think the root cause of NATO being so flabby is?
Lack of leadership in governments, lack of an understanding of war. There are not enough historians in government cabinets. The focus is always on accountancy, on money, on balancing the budget. And yet there's never any attention paid to quality, to the quality that's required to defend the realm, the quality that's required and the numbers that are required, and the added benefits of having a large army, because it's not just there to defend the country. It's a skills engine for the future as well. Back in the 70s, the British Army used to train the plumbers, the cooks, the managers, the electricians, the radio techs, the signalers. It used to train all these people, the car mechanics, the lorry fixers, the drivers, everything that went on later to become part of the civilian world. Instead, we started importing people from abroad to take on all those jobs. And now we don't have a skills base. We don't have an engine that creates and trains the tradesmen of the future anymore. We have to import them from somewhere else, which is sad.
That's a great point, Robin. I think we see that quite a lot with Israel. You've got that 3 years, whatever it is, in the army, and the guys that come out there are really like world leading entrepreneurs. And I've met a few myself. Those guys are really that army training really accelerates their development professionally.
Well, you go back to the 1960s and 50s even, and before that, and the army was always a place to put disaffected youth as well. So you ended up with an awful lot of young men who were rough, tough, adventurous, getting into mischief, and you put them in the army as an option. Okay, you're going to go to prison or you're going to go in the army. Which one is it? And an awful lot of people who were the older generation when I joined said, that's what happened to me, and it's what made me. So there's an awful lot of benefits to having this rite of passage to manhood coming from national service or voluntary service in an armed forces environment. It helped me. I mean, I joined when I was 15 years old. My home life had fallen to pieces. My education had followed. And it was an opportunity that I took with both hands. And it gave me a future which I would never have had otherwise.
I think that definitely goes along a lot, happens a lot in Ukraine, definitely now, of course. Almost every fourth guy there is into some kind of martial arts. I myself was getting trained in boxing from 19-year-old. Just tough people there, and very they're good at mechanics, they're good at fixing things. They make excellent workers, come to the UK working on building sites. I wonder if we could turn around our nation, Robin.
I don't know. What our nation seems to lack more than anything else now is leadership. People in government don't seem to have a strategic vision of the future. They don't know what they stand for. They don't have a philosophy. They're confused about whether they should be masculine or feminine, or whether they're born in the wrong body, or whether they should be spending millions of pounds on pumping drugs into people to change their gender instead of focusing on what's good for the nation. I mean, that's just one tiny thing. They're focused on changing speed limits to 20 miles an hour in Wales, and spending £1,000 per signpost to do it, when people haven't got youth clubs, when people haven't got investment in young people, when they haven't got skills and trades and apprenticeships, but they'll spend hundreds of millions of pounds on road signs to change the speed to 20 miles an hour in places where, in the valleys where I live, it's almost impossible to drive more than 20 miles an hour in most of the small towns, because all the cars are parked half on the pavement and half on the road. You have to go very, very slowly. So there's an awful lot of pointless spending and political spending, with people running around screaming about how the water in Wales belongs to Wales, but the power in England belongs to England, and all sorts of absolute drivel. Drivel's a wonderful word. Absolute drivel that comes out of politicians' mouths, trying to divide people rather than trying to unite them into things that they really believe in. Sometimes you hate the world.
Maybe our enemies will die laughing at us at some point, and then we'll be safe again.
Yeah, well, I think it was Jesus says the meek will inherit the world, inherit the earth, but it won't be the meek, it'll be the hungry. It'll be the hungry that will inherit the world, because they'll get angry and they'll get upset. And as the gap widens between the rich and poor, eventually, if something isn't done, it leads to revolution.
Yeah, definitely riches are something that the New Testament complains a lot about. And if you are rich, then you are in danger zone. And The Bible actually commands the teachers to command the rich to share. And I don't think that should be done with taxes. I think it should be done personally because I don't think the tax system is efficient. But I think that we were all designed to give. And if we don't give and share, then we actually damage ourselves because it's one of the best things that we can do. One of the best things that we can do is to give.
Yeah, you don't have to make rich people poor. But what you've got to do, if rich people are getting richer, then poor people need to get richer as well.
Absolutely.
Everybody's life needs to be improving. So you're not going to sit there and be resentful if this year you can afford a better car than you did last year, and you've managed to put some more money in your house and have a nicer holiday. You're not going to worry about the fact that some very, very famous or rich person is spending £500 on a bottle of wine at lunchtime. But there's something extraordinarily vulgar about the knowledge that somebody will spend £500 on a bottle of wine while somebody else has to work for 2 weeks as a checkout attendant in a supermarket to earn the same amount of money. I mean, that's a real concern, and that's happening every single day. And there's more and more of it every single day as well. There are people now who are struggling they're making choices again between shoes and cornflakes for their kids. That's the sort of choices they're having to make.
Yeah, and those rubbish foods are obesity causing. You know, people, if you just can't buy anything organic and you're just buying ready-made food, you're going down to the co-op to find what the prices are reduced 5 times, eating out-of-date food. You can't put on your heating. So yeah, some people will not put heating on all winter just so that they can, you know, save that money.
Yeah.
And I think that I blame a lot of big businesses and a lot of shareholders as well that control the decisions of boards, where they will lobby the government for visas to get people to come to the UK to undercut the British workers. And then that money is going to be going outside of the UK. So if a big business is coming making money in the UK, they should be helping the British citizens by employing them. You know, why would you come to a country to make money from it and outsource people to come and work here, taking, you know, undercutting jobs?
Well, they do it because they're allowed to, and they're allowed to by the British government. Yeah. And so you've got to, you know, it's always follow the money, follow the vested interest, follow the people who benefit from that particular piece of policy or refusal to do anything about that policy. A lot of the people that come in from abroad work very, very hard. In fact, they work harder than an awful lot of British people are prepared to work.
Yeah,
they're skilled, they're entrepreneurs, they build businesses, they pay taxes, and they do extraordinarily well. But they've benefited from a good education system, or they've benefited from growing up in a world where you don't work, you don't eat. And so they come into an environment where everyone's sitting around going, well, I don't feel like doing that. I don't want to go pick potatoes out of the fields. So they'll jump in there. They'll take that opportunity and they'll build a future from it. We've got a society that has failed in many, many aspects. But an awful lot of it, again, is down to leadership. There's no leadership. There's no sense of pride being portrayed to people, saying, come on, follow me. Let's go out there and let's get the whole town out and pick the bloody apples off the trees. Come on, let's earn some money. Let's go enjoy ourselves. Let's make this summer something very special. Let's get out this winter and get fit rather than running around the bloody gym. Go out there and pick sprouts in the fields. That'll get you fit. You know, if you've got no money and you want money, it's there for you. Let's go and get it, boys. Come on, let's go and get it, girls. No, everybody's, well, there's nothing I can do. Isn't it sad? They don't want to work. Well, it's a bit of a messed up system. It's almost like you need a bloody catastrophe to get people to concentrate on what's important again.
Robin, you're bringing tears to my eyes. You should definitely go into politics, man, and I will be behind your campaign. It's a biblical principle. If you do not work, you do not eat. And I'm all for giving and all that stuff. But if you're able to work, but you choose not to, then by the own Bible, you shouldn't deserve to eat. And that's New Testament.
Unless you're sick, of course, you know.
Yes, of course,
or old, yeah. But it's right now. There's a lot of people, old people. I mean, getting there. I'm 66. And a lot of my grandchildren are actually relying on me to help them pay their bills at the end of the month. It's supposed to be the other way around, but it's not. A lot of young people now are buying houses courtesy of the bank of mum and dad because they can't get a deposit otherwise. Whereas when me and Heather first met 45 years ago, she was a barmaid, I was a private in the British Army, and we got 100% mortgage. And we managed to pay it, and it was less than 3 times our annual income. You can't do that anymore. Those opportunities aren't there. There's a lot of questions to ask as to why.
Yeah, I think it's sickening that we allow investments into property like that. Something like it's like investing into food or the nation's food supply. You jack up the prices because you own the farms. Same thing with living, or even with water. I just think it's obscene that we allow investments into the private sector like this.
Yep. Yeah, I had a pharmaceutical executive to dinner with me in Prague once, who and I questioned him about the morality of the big pharma, and he said, "Well, it's not my job to be moral." He said, "It's my job to make money." And if a cure came along for cancer tomorrow, or reduce the need for surgery in many cases, the chances are it will be bought out of the system, because it wouldn't be profit making. So they'll keep it hidden away. Yeah. Conspiracy theories abound, but the world's a worrying place when the motive for everything is profit.
So what is the solution?
Leadership. It is leadership. It's moral leadership. And everybody's got an excuse, oh, it's real politics. You don't understand the big picture. Oh, yes, I think I do understand the big picture. The big picture is profit. And how do you defeat that? Politics now is a big marketing campaign for votes. It's not about decency. It's not about morality. It's not about working for the benefit of the people. It's about working to get into power. And when you get into power, then you have to pay the debts back to the lobbyists that funded you to get into power. Big business is important. Employment is important. Farming is important. Industry is important. But so is quality of life. When I lived in Prague, quality of life, the wages were much lower than London, and yet the quality of life was much higher. And as one example, the transport system was so cheap that it was almost free to get to work. And when you got over 60, it was €8 a month for me, all my public transport. All the working people lived in the outskirts of the city and came to and from work on a weekly pass called a letachka. And they didn't have to pay a day's wages every week to get to and from work. You work in London on the national minimum wage, and I guarantee you're losing one of those 5 days' wages just going to and from work every day. That shouldn't be the case. You shouldn't have to pay so bloody much to go to work. It's a public transport system. It should be there to service the community, not to make a profit.
So I will echo some of the calls on LinkedIn that Robin form a political party. I think that's your next thing. Once, or maybe you'll form some kind of party in Ukraine. I don't know, man. But how you feel? I know that you've had a rough cold.
Yeah, I went to my son's wedding in Sweden, which was great fun. Place called Sonderheim, and while I was there or on the way back, we picked up a very nasty cold. So we got back, and my wife and I have been in bed for the last five days. Really, usually one of us is sick, but at this time it was both of us. So it was like who feels up to making some tea, who feels up to getting some water, who feels up to walk to the shops and back to get some more paracetamol. But we're coming through it now. Going back to politics, though, politics is a young man's business. It really is. I think prime ministers should average about 50 to 55 because the stresses that are involved in looking after the worries of a nation are enormous. And the stresses of being involved in politics are enormous. one of our biggest failings in the United Kingdom. As soon as somebody decent gets up and puts themselves above the parapet on behalf of the people, everybody feels it's their right to shoot them to pieces. Nobody in politics is treated with any level of dignity or respect. They're all treated as criminals. So when you get good, we get the people we deserve, the thick-skinned, uncaring people, because nobody else can tolerate putting up with the nonsense, the abuse. I ran the Northern Ireland Veterans movement for about 8 years until we got a paper through Parliament stopping the vexatious prosecution of British soldiers. And it wasn't the sabers of my enemies that were the problem. It was the daggers of my friends. It was the people that were supposed to be on my side, fighting for the same campaign, making personal remarks, abusing my family, posting lies online, and so on. You know, it's that kind of environment. So you get what you deserve in politics. If you want decent people, then for a good start would be to treat them decently.
Yeah, great points. When was your latest book published again? I'll just
October. Yeah, it's been out to about 7 weeks now.
right. Okay.
So yeah, and it's had a very, very good response for a self-published book. I needed to get it out there quickly. The war's on now. I didn't want to sit back and hope that a publisher was going to take it, put it on their list, and publish it and edit it in about 12 months' time. That wasn't going to do very much. So yeah, it's out there. Slava Ukraini, who dares shares. Glory to Ukraine, and who dares shares is pretty much my jingle at the end of most of my posts now. And it's an observational diary. It's my observational diary about that starts before the war, when I'm screaming blue murder about 100,000 troops being on the Belarus border, and they're going to come, and the world turning around and saying, no, let's talk about Boris's Christmas party. Let's talk about Djokovic getting kicked out of Australia. Let's talk about the big orange monster in America, but let's not talk about Russia trying to cross the border and invade a sovereign state. So I got so frustrated that I started to write about it every day, and eventually, you know, we got this big following, so I've collated the first 20 months of what's happened in that war from my point of view into Slava Ukraini. And the other book on the other side of my shoulder is my autobiography, which has been out for a long, long time now, Fighting Scared.
It's actually a very unique book, the Slava Ukraini, because it was never really written in a sense to be a book in the first place. It was written for a purpose to defend Ukraine. So you've got a lot of passion in there, and you're writing in a certain way that to people that have a short attention span, LinkedIn really limits the amount of words that you can put there. So you've got a sort of like very emotional, honest, experienced viewpoint that's day by day. And as you read it, I really felt a lot of emotions myself, because I was in Ukraine when this mass invasion started, and you're writing in that very targeted way to appeal, to make it also very interesting for people to read, because on LinkedIn you have to sort of capture people's attention to get engagement, and you have some of the largest engagement, certainly one of the few people that are getting between, I don't know, several hundred to several thousand likes per post, and that's probably I don't know, between 100,000 and, or I would say between 40,000 and up to 1 million views. So this is a very good historical record from a person who's very qualified to talk about it, being thinking about war for so long. So thanks for doing.
One wonderful thing about the LinkedIn forum is that it limits you as somebody who's posting something to 1,250 words. So you can't elaborate too much. You can't bring in, you're not writing an essay, you're writing an opinion, you're writing a commentary. And it has to hit the mark quite quickly and quite strongly, but say something important as well. And it was the readership on LinkedIn coming back to me and saying, you should do this, that actually prompted me into self-publishing the book. And it was, Slava Ukraini, Who Dare Shares, is my 6th book, and each one is a progression from the previous one. You know, there's always a learning curve about things that you've learned and got wrong in the previous books you've written, and then you improve them and you work on them, and then you get something better. So you know, there's a great deal of pride in and personal satisfaction in producing something like this. I did the cover. I sent the ideas to a friend of mine who helped me with one of my books, Warrior Poet Soldier Songs, Tommy Brabham in Prague. And I said, look, I want a tank. I want a Ukrainian tank at war. I want the flag in there. So we've got the blue upper level, and the yellow lower level, portraying the Ukrainian flag. And I said, what can you do with that? And this is what he came back with. But the whole thing has been created by me, and I'm very pleased with that. And I'm very pleased with the response I've got from the people who have read it so far and the reviews that have come up.
Yeah, I've got it here on my Kindle, and it's almost disappointing that I can't get it up to date, the latest, like the latest posts, because you're still posting. It's not, so it's not like this is the end of it here. So I definitely would recommend collating like a version 2 of, like, you could have this an update. I don't know if you update the original Kindle manuscript or you just make another version of it with like the certain dates. But yeah, keep doing it, man. It's really encouraging your posts. Going to Ukraine if
Well,
you
I'm still writing on a daily, almost daily basis about Ukraine. There are other things that come up now and then, and I like to poke my finger in somebody's eye in a different direction now and then. But it's important. I think it's the most important thing that's going on in the world at the moment. So if people want to get the book, they can get it on Amazon in all 3 formats. And if they want a signed copy, they can go to robinhorsfall.com and they can get a signed copy directly from me. But you know, writing is a thrill because it's a voice. It's a voice for me, but I think it's also a voice for the people of Ukraine as well. And it gives them confidence that somebody over here is shouting on their behalf every single day.
Yeah, I definitely recommend that you get a signed copy, because you're not just getting a great book that's signed, you're investing in someone who's actively defending Ukraine in the information sphere. So think of it as the best £40 you've ever spent.
Plus P&P, unfortunately.
Yeah, inflation, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So like, we're going back to politics, you're saying it's like a young person's game, but I think a lot of young men, they need, in a sense, I don't know if father figure is the right word, but they need to have strong men around them with strong ideals. I think the worst thing for young men is to be around this sort of woke mentality. It's just toxic. It's just this demasculizing men for what reason, you know? And that's why we need more people like you. We need you to mentor people. I mean, maybe you'll even mentor someone who gets into politics with similar ideals, good, wholesome ideals, getting out into the fields, harvesting the potatoes, getting some proper exercise, coming home pumped full of testosterone. You don't get that from sitting around an office. You don't get that from playing Xbox. You know, you get that from working outdoors or putting kitchens together. You know, so people shouldn't see that kind of work as low paid stuff. It's actually investment in your health. You know, so and community. We one of the things we lack so much now is community. So many men, they're just sitting home lonely because either their other friends have all just become like tamed house dads, and they're all sitting watching TV, and that's all they have time for, and they're so stressed out with their work. And men just don't get together much anymore, but they're just like demasculinized, isolated, depressed, middle-aged men, and that's not what we're designed to be. We're designed to always have that male companionship, and those kind of jobs, working out in the fields. I mean, those soldiers in Ukraine, as much as it is dreadful being out in front lines, they're forming incredible companionship, friendships, albeit they're losing some of their friends there and then. I can't imagine, but I would never want to go and fight in a trench. Um, but our society is so split up, and I think there's so many problems with our weakness.
Well, yeah, there are huge problems, and they start in government now, where an awful lot of emphasis is um, being placed on um, socially engineering the new modern man. And young men are not comfortable with that, but they don't quite know how they should and should not behave, what they should and should not say. There's an awful lot of boys from my experience, and I taught children for nearly 30 years. I taught them martial arts, who love to wrestle. They'll wrestle with each other, they'll wrestle with their dad. And they grow up in an environment now where somebody is scolding them, chastising them for wanting to wrestle or fight with their brothers. And yet that process builds personal confidence. It builds the confidence to know that you can take a knock and get up and carry on. It builds the confidence in your physical strength, and you know what you can and can't do. It gives you the confidence to stand up to authority when you're being challenged and not to be intimidated. It's not necessarily, it shouldn't be enforced. It's not there for everybody. Some people are less inclined in that direction, but the majority of young men want to indulge in sport, want to indulge in mischievous or risky ventures. And if they're not given the opportunity to do that, then yeah, they're going to get depressed. They're going to get miserable. They're going to be lost. They're not going to want to know how they should prove themselves as an adult member of the human race, because nobody's telling them this is what men do anymore. I was lucky. I was from previous generation. I had mentors that basically said, "Stand up for yourself. If you don't, you're going to end up being a whipped puppy at the back of the pile. Don't worry too much about what other people think. Worry about what you think of yourself, and fit in to a community without being subservient to it. Find a place for yourself. Sometimes it takes a long time, but I think an awful lot of people find themselves unhappy and miserable in life because they don't know how to achieve any form of dignity or status anymore.
Very valid points. I think we should also, as men, share our skills with other guys so that we can, we shouldn't have to have like somebody sitting with this wrecked, moldy kitchen. If we have some friends that are able to sort of help a hand and guide them on how to just do things, you can input like a 1 or 2 hours of your life, advise somebody on how they can go about making a kitchen, how to put some shelves together, going and actually showing them how to fit a sink or even just make a cabinet. We have so many skills that we could be sharing, and just it's so fulfilling to actually share what we can do, our professions, and it's not, it won't take away money from people in businesses. It's just, if everybody has a more net sharing attitude, then the small amount of money that you would lose and say less extra bits in business because maybe 10% of people know a bit more about carpentry or joinery, but then you'd get benefits and other things that you're not skilled in, like for some legal help or some kind of medical help or nutritional help. We just should be a more sharing society, and we shouldn't be just wasting all our free time, allowing Netflix to program us. We should we were designed to be communal people.
I'm not so sure that we were ever a more sharing society. I think we were a poorer society in many ways. So we relied on one another more. So you
Right.
run out of money by the end of the week. So you'd borrow a cup of pasta off your neighbor. You'd send one of your kids around to borrow 2 bob off your mum to buy a loaf of bread. So because we had less, we depended on each other more. And so is that sharing? I don't know if it's sharing. It's just a case of the fact that we needed each other, and we didn't have fences between the houses. We had a strip of wire, and the kids used to jump over the wire and play in each other's gardens. The wire was just there to mark where your potatoes ended and the radishes that were grown next door began. People build higher and higher walls between themselves the more money they have. You had industry as well. You had people that worked in the pits. You had people that worked in the factories. So they were brought together by that particular process in their everyday lives. And they had community centers where they all got together and danced and sang and drank and enjoyed their lives on a Saturday night with the limited amount of money they had. Now you've got people who have their telephone, their screen, their they're linked to Domino's Pizza and their television, and they don't need to go out anymore. They'll communicate without ever talking to somebody for weeks. They'll sit at the same table in the same restaurant and communicate with each other in writing by text rather than actually indulge in a conversation. And if you get half a dozen people around a table, try getting their telephones off them and put them in the middle without touching them for the next hour while you have dinner and force them to speak. It's incredibly hard. It's almost addictive. That screen. I mean, I have to actually take my laptop and put it over the other side of the room so that when the advertisements come on the television, a commercial break comes on the television, I don't pick it up and look at it again during the commercials. I have to put it on the other side of the room so I
That's
don't
very
do that.
interesting. That's very socially
Yeah.
interesting, because I would have thought that if you're in your 60s, you would have been well sort of trained in the normal way of human socialization, that those technologies wouldn't become addictive. Whereas with me, I was sort of the first, I would say, 14 years of my life, I was sort of, there was no like Netflix, there was no like Xbox Online, everything was social. You played games to your friends in the same house, you still played football outside. But we've sort of learned, we've sort of been trained to this whole, the Netflix generation. But that's really interesting that even yourself have
Yeah.
come to the digital age.
Yeah. And I mean, there's also the thing, one of the things an awful lot of corporations don't take into consideration is that there's a lot of old people that aren't telephone and computer savvy. And they're saying, oh, well, just do this on your computer. Oh, you just need to get this
Just do
app.
this.
Oh, you just need to use your telephone to call the AA. You just need to, and they're going, I haven't got a phone, or I don't know what an app is. And there's an awful lot of people stuck out there at the moment who are giving up on technology and being isolated from an awful lot of services that you used to get by picking up the telephone or talking to a human being that they can't do anymore. I broke down in mid Wales a few weeks ago, and I had to get in touch with my son on my telephone to get me the contact number of the AA so that I could call the AA to come out to where I was, because I couldn't figure out exactly where I was with Google Maps on my telephone. And fortunately, Alex helped me out. But it's what if I couldn't have got? What if he didn't answer the phone? It's a different world. You have to try and keep up with it, but you get to a certain age where you can't.
I think that's a symptom of our weakness, is that we're not sociably together anymore. We're just all separate, and we don't learn the value of community when everything can be done remotely, Zoom meetings. This is a weak culture we've created, I think. Maybe we should like have more kind of places where there's a digital detox. That'd be a good market, a no phones, no computers holiday where people just sit and work on a farm or something like that. That would be a good experience.
Well, I used to teach a karate class in Putney High Street on a Wednesday night, and we used to go to the only bar afterwards. We used to go to the only bar which did not have music. It had no music, it had no televisions, and it had benches, and the place was packed until 11:20 every Wednesday night, because everybody was sat around talking, and they could hear one another. And it became one of the favorite places to meet people of the opposite sex, because you could actually have a conversation. I don't know, I moved on years later, but I remember it took you maybe 15, 20 years ago. It was the most popular bar on Putney High Street. People talked. So I like your idea there. I think that's great. A IT free zone, a social zone, where you go in, you have to hand your coat and your phone in and put it in a little box and lock it away. No telephones, no laptops, no nothing. You go in there and you enjoy yourself with human beings until you leave.
Yeah, I would probably end up doing something like teaching survival skills because that's another thing that I'd be interested in. I know you'll be an absolute expert in living off the land, that kind of stuff. We should do a podcast on that at some point. Maybe in person. We'll go out in the field and we'll practice our stuff. Just throwing that out there. Um,
Well, I've often found my way in London by the sun. I got stuck in a car in London, thinking, where the bloody hell am I? Well, I know the river's south of here, and I'm going to, and there's the sun, so that's south. I'm going to turn left here, and that'll take me back towards the river, and I'll get my bearings again. So even in a car in a city, survival skills can be very, very useful if you know your astronomy.
yeah, I was in Abu Dhabi last week, and I genuinely used this compass
Yeah,
to help me navigate because the app on the phone wasn't working very well. I could hardly see the blue dial. And sometimes even in London, when you go out from underground, the GPS is messed up for a few minutes. So you can be walking the wrong direction. So having a compass is actually still genuinely useful. And just having a UK map, 1 to 150,000, size scale, you can still navigate from like England to Scotland if you had to, without any assistance if you just know the basics of reading road signs. But the amount of when I brought this out in Abu Dhabi, we were after it was like a party. I had a long day. We had eating sessions, and then we went to this bar afterwards. And the guys, I brought out this compass, and the guys were laughing at me like crazy, like I'm some kind of weird thing. And I felt laughing at them because this like it's so manly to be able to navigate with a map and a compass. But nowadays, that's
yeah.
people laugh at you for that kind of stuff, you know?
Well, they shouldn't. You should never laugh at somebody for having more knowledge than you.
Yeah.
I can walk out the front. If the sky is clear here, I can find my way by the stars. Um, that's not too difficult. It's they're not. I mean, you can actually use your watch to find north and south, providing you can see the sun and you've got a shadow. There are lots of different ways of finding direction, depending which country you're in and what the weather's like. But it's there's skills, staying warm, staying dry, um, finding food, what's edible, what's not edible. They're all there and readily available for people. I mean, one of the hardest environments to actually survive in is Northern Europe in the winter. And yet you can go to, for example, let me think, you go to a silver birch tree, drill a hole in the side of it, and the sugary liquid that comes out will give you a food source. So, there's all sorts of foods if you know where to find them.
Yeah, there's if you grow, I believe it's a walnut tree, that has more calories per square meter than wheat field. And so I know one person who might come on a podcast who's going out planting around him walnut trees so that in the future, if there's a Mad Max scenario, he's got food from walnuts because I mean in Ukraine that's like a staple food in wintertime. You'll actually go out and you'll see it will be raining walnuts. So you'll be walking along the road, walnut tree crack, and they do you don't have to harvest them because the fall and the ripe, they're protected and
Yeah,
you can
yeah,
store them over winter time, you know?
yeah. Right now, you could be out there picking up chestnuts for free off the ground if you wanted to.
Hmm.
Sweet chestnuts. There are food sources. I mean, when I was a kid, my grandmother and mother used to box the potatoes, not the potatoes, box the apples from the end of the season, box them, wrap them in brown paper, and they would dry and grow very sweet and be preserved for the winter. We would pickle the onions, we'd pickle the cabbage, we'd pickle the eggs, all the fruits of the summer and of the harvest. You'd preserve them for the winter. It would be a normal process.
Yeah.
And some of the traditions, the traditional foods that we now buy from the supermarket at Christmas would be homemade.
Yeah, I don't understand why our government are not teaching the population. It's just a matter of national security. Um, Homesteading. If you have a little bit of land, teach them how to make a raised bed, how to harvest those apples. I've never heard of that method, by the way. The way I tried it was basically put the sliced apples up and dry them in the sun, which takes quite a long time. You need a lot of sunshine for that, but that's quite an interesting method. But why are we not teaching people? Why are we teaching people about all this woke stuff? We should be teaching them how to grow things, like properly grow stuff and eat it.
and teach them how to cook it as well. There's a whole generation of young people in the United Kingdom who can't boil potatoes, who don't know how to mash potatoes, who have lived their almost entire adult life on microwave food, processed food. And if you want to understand why people have health issues and obesity problems, then a lot of it's down to what they consume, and they're consuming large amounts of processed foods. I mean, they've lost the joy of preparing food and of making food and to eating healthy food because they don't understand it. Even if they do have access to it, they'll spend more on a takeaway than they will on a whole bag full of vegetables that would last you 3 or 4 days.
It seems like it's the fault of your generation in a sense, because I'm almost 40, so my eating habits would have been passed on to my kids. But it's your generation that would have taught my generation how
I
to.
don't think you should generalize about a generation. I mean, my wife cooks every day still. She cooked for all our kids.
Brilliant.
She taught our kids to cook. You know, there are individuals who grew up in societies where I think the big change came when mothers suddenly found that they could only afford to live by going to work. So when I was a kid, one working adult could feed a family. And then they brought all the mothers into the workforce. And you ended up with a situation where they thought they were all going to be better off. But what happened is prices went up. So then you got twice as many people working for the same amount of return, the same quality of life. But you've taken the mother away from the house. You've taken the mother away from the management of the children. You've taken the mother away from setting the standards of behavior for the entire family. And, the preparation of food and creating that community around the table was part of the skill base that she had and imparted to her daughters especially, but to her sons as well. And that disappeared. And I think maybe it was that change more than anything else that took those home skills away from the next generation.
Do you think people were happier back then when only one person had to work, but you had much less technology than you have nowadays?
I think school children were more secure. I think they always had a safe place to go home to. I think that they knew where mum was, where dinner was. I think mums tended to be the disciplinarians in the house. Dad came home and finished it off if it didn't work. There was in my world, there was an awful lot of respect for women as something extraordinarily special, who needed to be revered and treasured and looked up to. That was my world. I know there were exceptions. I know there were bad cases. I know that women didn't get equal pay for equal work a lot of the time, which was unfair. But I'm not so sure sometimes that what many of them gained balanced out what they gave up.
I think we can probably entitle this podcast something like Ukraine and solving the Western first world problems or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, we wandered off of Ukraine a lot. I mean, I don't think the soldiers, the men and women in Ukraine, are worrying about what gender they are at the moment. Do you?
No, I don't think so.
No, I'm sure they're bloody not.
They're
And they're
worried.
both fighting.
They're worried about when they're going to get the next bath after a month in the mud, and worried about
Or
their
if
fingers falling off. Worried
they're
about
worried if they're going to be alive next week. Yeah.
worried if their family is going to be with another guy because they're gone psychotic and they can't have normal relationship with their wives anymore because they're so messed up, and it's happening a lot. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I sometimes think people get wrapped up in these, what should we call them? These issues because they don't have anything really important to worry about in their lives.
That's a good point. Yeah. I mean, in Ukraine, there's no atheists. When ministers go there to meet the soldiers, all the soldiers they want to be like anointed with oil. There's no atheists in the Ukrainian army. It's,
Well, still a very religious nation, always have been. Um, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that either. Um, Strangely enough, we all turn to God when we think we're going to die. Everyone wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. Is that the story?
yeah, my late granddad was kind of made fun of people that were Christians because they were still going to like the doctors and all that kind of stuff, saying, "Well, if heaven's so great, why are you trying to avoid to go there?" And yeah, I don't actually know if he ever believed in God when he passed away, but I don't know, life's more than just living to be as old as possible with as much money in the bank as possible. Sometimes you think people, he who wins is he who dies with the most money in the bank, and that's a very sad and lonely place to die with lots of money, but no one loves you, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I got a friend who said you should spend the last penny. He's 96 now. He said, Robin, he said you should spend your last penny on the day you die. It's just a question of timing.
Um,
Yeah, the yeah. I mean, God gets us all in the end. That's a guarantee. And the idea that money is going to make more money is going to make a huge difference to your quality of life is wrong, because enough money makes a difference to your life. Once you get past enough, it's just another toy. It's just a different holiday. It's just a bigger car, but it's not going to make a huge difference to the quality of your life. In fact, it can be quite destructive because some people think it's a good reason to go out and find another sexual partner, which is also another way of screwing up your own life. There's a pun in there somewhere.
I think well, there's two ways to define wealth. One way of wealth is how long you could survive without any money, and the wealth would be defined in that at a certain time period. Another way you could define wealth is when you die, how many people fondly remember you and miss you.
Yeah, I think I can probably, if somebody said, how wealthy are you? I said, well, I'm very wealthy because I've got a handful of very close personal friends. I've got a wife I've been with for 45 years. I've got 5 kids, 10 grandchildren, and 6 great grandchildren, and another one on the way. And, you know, all the problems that go with that are worth it, because there's always an element of love that comes back in return for that. It's those are the important things, but it's nice to have enough money.
Well, Robin, I won't take any more of your time because you've got all those grandchildren and family waiting for you, and you've got your LinkedIn daily posts. But thanks very much for your time again, Robin. It's always great to talk to you. Is there anything you want to leave us with for the next few weeks when it comes to Ukraine and the world in general?
Yeah, keep an eye on it. Keep telling your representatives that they should pay more attention to Ukraine and that they should be supporting it. And if they want their votes next time round, that's where they need to be pointing their focus. You want to follow me? You can find me on Google, find me on robinhorsfall.com.
Thanks, Robin, and thanks for watching, everybody. And please invest in the free world's future by investing in a signed copy of one of his books. He deserves it. Thanks for your time, everybody. See you later.
Cheers, Nick.